On episode 200 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we're going to discuss strength essentials. You can find the show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast/200. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. So today we are going to be talking about strength, but if your interest is in weight loss, you really need to go check out Surefire Results for Weight Loss. It's a 28-day program that I have over at Forever Fitness. You can find it by going to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/surefire. I know you can lose the weight. I guarantee it. If you don't lose the weight, I'll give you your money back. It's that simple. You have nothing to risk and everything to lose. So join me at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/surefire. If you've listened to this podcast at all, then you know that strength training is one of the most important modalities for you to have. And the reason I say that is I've had a lot of authors on here, and we've talked about movement, we've talked about aging, we've talked about longevity. And living longer is not the goal. Living better is the goal. And to do that, you need to be stronger. You need to have good strength. I've had one episode, I've looked at the stats. Grip strength is actually one of the best indicators of longevity. So I did do an episode saying if you have a weak handshake, that might be a bad sign. And for a lot of people, it is. So in this episode, I want to take some time to talk about strength training so that you can understand an approach to strength training and what it takes to get strong. I think one of the reasons people really want to shy away from strength training, there's two reasons, but one of the main ones is that they're very concerned. They just don't want to lift the weights. They see those big clunky weights and they're intimidated by them. The interesting thing is you can get very, very strong just using your body weight. I weigh a little over 200 pounds. That, in a lot of cases, is plenty of weight for me to move and do strength training with. So, you don't have to lift weights. It's just weights do make it a much easier process because you don't have to contort yourself as much. There's just some easy exercises you can do with weights that are going to be very effective and get you there. You can do all of these with body weight. It just takes a little bit more creativity and you might not get as strong. When you see those guys that are able to deadlift over 1,000 pounds or squat over 1,000 pounds, the reality is they would never, ever have gotten that strong just using body weights. So there's a point of limit with body weight as far as how strong you can get. It's just, the gravity and what you're pushing. But, unless you get heavier, that you're not going to be able to do heavier and heavier. There's a basic limitation. Now, the second reason I think a lot of people shy away from weights, and this is a lot of times the women, is they're afraid they're going to get big and bulky. The bodybuilders that you see that get big and bulky, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of training for them to get to that point. So you're not going to get that big and bulky. You just do two things. You don't have the genetics for it. And two, you don't have the patience for it. Those guys are working way, way harder than you would ever imagine yourself working. They're going through a lot more than you would ever imagine yourself doing. So, you're not going to get that bulky. And reality is in moving the muscles and burning the energy, your mitochondria are going to be firing a lot more because you've built this muscle, and that muscle is going to help you be fitter, but it's also going to help you on things like keeping your metabolism up and being able to move effectively. So strength training is very, very important, and I do want you to make that a part of your daily life. I mean, it needs to be a modality that you spend some time on. So how do we get stronger? And the reality of that is, it's kind of going to sound kind of funny, but we get stronger by lifting heavier things. So to lift heavier things, you need to lift heavier things. That might seem counterintuitive. How do I get strong to lift that heavy thing without being already strong? And the reality of that is we call it resistance training or weight training. Again, it doesn't have to be with weights. That's just a very effective way to get it done. So in looking at strength and what you're trying to accomplish when you do your strength training, you want to look at the cycle for a muscle. And what a muscle needs to grow is it needs three things. It needs a challenge, something that's going to push it past what is comfortable. And then after it's done that, it then needs some food, okay? It needs some protein, it needs a little bit of carbs, blood sugar anyway. And then it needs, the third thing is rest. And so for a good, effective strength training program, you need all three of those and you need them in the right doses, okay? So let's say I want to build very strong legs. And one of the exercises that I'm going to use to build very strong legs is the squat. And in particular, I want to do the back squat because that's the one that's going to allow me to carry the most weight through the range of motion. So here I am. I put the weight on. I use good form. I warm up. I do all the things that are in that strength training, the resistance training tips podcast I did a couple days ago. I'll make sure to include a link in the show notes for that. But that's a good one for you to go back to in parallel with this one because they really do talk to each other. So here's what I've got to do. I've got to move through a range of motion that I want to build strength in. Now, the problem with most muscles is that it's going to be that way no matter how strong you are or whatnot, but you're always going to have a point where your lift is the weakest. So I have to move through the full range of motion to build real strength. If I squat down and I only squat down about 3 or 4 inches, I'm very, very strong in that range of motion. I could probably do 400 or 500 pounds on my back if all I were doing was little 2 and 3 inch squats. That's not doing me any good. I need to be able to lift the weight all the way through the range of motion. And I can tell you my weakest point in my lift is really right about the time that my hip crease is coming down to around where my knees are. Once I get my hip crease down below my knees, I'm usually okay to come back up, but I get a little weak right in that range just before I get there. So that's my weak range. So I'm only going to be as strong in the squat as I am in that weak range. So training through the full range of motion is important. I will talk about some advanced techniques in a minute, so we'll come back to that about my squat, but just realize that it does me no good to do little 3-inch squats. It does me good to do the full range of motion if I want to build real strength. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I give my body just enough challenge. And to do that, I need to get under a good bit of weight and I need to move it. And I don't need to move it all that slow. I need to move it relatively quickly. So strength is a power type situation where I really want to move that weight. So unlike if I were trying to build mass, I'm not worried about how long the tension is on my muscle. I'm more concerned about just getting the full amount of the weight moved. And as a result, most strength training protocols are going to have you working in a very low range of reps, typically 5 or less, and sometimes maybe even 1. Depending on how heavy you're going with the weight. But so looking at a up to 3, basically 1 to 5 rep range. Now, you'll go through and you'll do that exercise and then you'll take a rest. Now, for strength training, typically the reps that you're trying to do, you're going to take about a 3-minute break, 2 to 3 minute break between each set. And that might seem kind of excessive, but what we're trying to do again is we're trying to move a lot more weight. And so we need that rest time to allow our muscles an opportunity to recover from that work. So the 3 minutes is not going to let us cool down to a point where we're not warmed up, but is going to give us that opportunity to then go in and be pretty much back to normal. You'll still see some declines over the course of the sets, but a good 3-minute break. Now, a lot of the protocols for strength will have as many as, I've seen as many as 6 or 7 or 8 sets. I'm more of a fan of trying to keep it around 5. I think 5 is a very good number of sets for each exercise. Now, it also depends on how many exercises you're going to do, because if you're sitting down and saying, I'm going to do 8 exercises for my legs, you're not going to be able to do 5 sets of those. So maybe those are fewer sets if you're covering those muscle groups over and over. So looking at the volume, strength work is not a volume thing either. So it's not a time under tension. It's not really a volume thing. It's more of just saying I want to move more weight. So a very typical one you hear, and it's modeled after strong lifts, and it's the 5x5. So basically doing 5 sets of 5 reps per set. Use relatively heavy weight for that. That's typically going to be somewhere around 70-75% of your 1 rep max. And those are going to hurt. And so taking a good 2 to 3 minute break between each one is good. And then after you've done this work, So maybe I have a 5x5 where I'm doing a full body 5x5, squats, deadlifts, push-ups, pull-ups, and overhead press. So those will be my 5 that I'm going to do 5x5 exercises. That'll take me about an hour and 15 minutes if I'm doing it for strength, because again, I'll do that rep of 5 and then I'm going to take a good 3-minute break between each one. So I think you can see pretty quickly that I'm going to spend a good bit of time sitting around resting and walking around, just letting myself wait for that next rep so I'm recovered. So the resistance is the challenge, then the rest, and then after that, I need to make sure that I'm getting the food I need. So a good dose of protein and some carbs are okay, a little bit. You want to refresh the glycogen in the muscle. So, having a little bit of carbs after that workout is not a bad idea. It's actually a pretty good idea. Okay, so we talked about now kind of the structure of this is that you're going to go low rep, and you want to just go ahead and move the heaviest amount of weight you can for that rep set. And you want to go through this relatively quickly, but you're going to take longer breaks between each set. You've done the work. Now you've fed. When do you want to come back and work again? And I would say typically for strength training, you want to give your body about 72 hours to recover from that work before you go back. So, that's skipping almost 3 days between each one of those sets. And I really do think that's a good protocol for building good, decent strength. You may need a little bit more rest early on in your training, but as you get more and more advanced, you'll probably get to a point where you can train every 3rd day or every 4th day effectively and not have any problems with that. So there are some advanced protocols to help you build even more strength, and I do want to take a little bit of time to talk about those. Now, I explained to you earlier that you're not going to be equally strong through the full range of motion. So let's say I want to work on my weakest part of that range. What are some tools that I can use to do that? Or if I wanted to make sure that I was training maximally through the full range of motion, what are some tools that I could do that? So first I'll talk about just working on the weakest part of the range. And what you can do there is, like I said, for me in the squat, it's at that lowest point where like my hips are about to drop right at my knee, right in the knee area, right in that area. Now, for my push-up, it's relatively the same thing. It's right as the bar is around my chest. So at this point, I'm fully stretched and I'm trying to get the momentum to change from the drop to the up. And I'm not going to bounce it off my chest because that's not what my chest was designed to do. So I bring the bar down to the chest and I'm ready to just drive that bar up. So if I want to work that weakest area, then maybe I do some partial reps in that area with some weight that really challenges me. If you're going to do something like that, make sure you're doing it safe. You're in a rack or something like that. But taking some heavier weights and trying to work in that range, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot, but just pushing that area a little bit harder as a part of your work. And I would do this after I had done, maybe I did my sets of push-ups and now I'm going to go just do 1 or 2 sets of these partials down in that area where I'm struggling with that sticking point. And so I know where my sticking point is and I'm really going to work that sticking point. I'm going to do some partials in that sticking point area to build some more strength in that area. Be careful, this is more of an intermediate or advanced thing, so you shouldn't be doing this if you're a beginner. Make sure you're doing it safe, but those partials can really help you get past the sticking point if that's what's keeping you from getting your overall lifts stronger. Okay, the next thing that you can do if you want to work optimally through the full range of motion is to consider using bands or chains. And again, this is an advanced thing to do. Don't recommend it for many people, but it's just one of those things to recognize. Like I said in my push-up, and I'm not very different than a lot of other people, they are the strongest at the top of the movement, and they're the weakest at the bottom of the movement. And so by taking that chain and draping it over the bar, so it's equal on both sides, and putting them on both sides, what's happening is as I extend my arms, more and more of the chain is coming off of the ground, and therefore there's heavier and heavier resistance on the bar as the bar goes up. Likewise, if you're using bands, as you stretch the band, the resistance that the band gives off is stronger and stronger. So as you push that weight up, as the band stretches, it's putting more resistance against your body. So in your weakest area, you don't have much resistance at all because the bands are just really almost just there. As you start to stretch those bands going up, though, that's when you're going to start seeing that additional resistance. So a lot of protocols out there, a lot of things to consider when you're trying to build your strength. But the base of it is this. It's just you have to get out there, you have to lift heavy things, and you have to do it consistently. And then you have to feed, you have to rest, and then you have to repeat it after that amount of rest time. So we'll do a little bit of recap here. Main thing is to get stronger, to be able to lift heavier things, you need to be able to lift heavy things. You need to use good form always. You need to be safe always. When you're lifting weights, particularly anything that's over your body or over your head, you're in a very risk position, and you need to make sure that you're taking that into account, using the appropriate racks and safety equipment, asking for a spotter when you need it, using good form, being warm before you go and work out. Those are all kind of the main core staples of just doing it right. Have a purpose and stick to that purpose. Just because your rest is supposed to be about 3 minutes, don't make one of them 5 minutes because you were on the phone, and another one you're just like, I got to catch up, so I'm doing 1 minute. Keep on a plan. Keep a timer. I literally have my phone sitting there with 3 minutes on it, and when I finish my set, I hit that timer. I can go get some water. I can go sit down on a bench, whatever I need to do. Let myself get into that recovery where my legs feel like they've gotten things back, or whatever body part I'm working feels like it's kind of ready to go again. There'll be a little decline over time, but because you're taking that extra time, your second set's not going to be much worse than your first set. And so you'll be able to continue to keep those heavier weights through those lifts. If you're doing something for mass or endurance, then you're going to lower those rest periods considerably. But for strength, you want to have the longer rest periods. Make sure you're doing a good enough volume of work where your body feels it, but not the kind of crazy volume of endurance stuff. So it's fewer reps, fewer sets, just getting yourself to a point where, you're really moving your body through that full range of motion so that you're experiencing the strength through the full range of motion. And then, finally is if you're finding you're getting onto plateaus, you can look to some of those advanced areas. But in a general sense, strength is not a linear thing. It tends to be something where you work your way up to a bit of strength. You might then notice a slight tail off. Sometimes it's just good to just use that as an opportunity to deload a little. And a deload is basically a weightlifter term that's used to mean take some time off. Maybe you want to do something a little different. So one of the things I'll do, and I've talked about this a little bit before as well, is periodization of my work. So I'll work through my strength work for about 8 weeks, and then I'll go ahead and I'll say, well, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spend 8 weeks doing some mass work. So now I'm changing the way I'm lifting. I'm lifting for time under tension, so I'm moving the bar much slower. I'm not using quite as much weight, doing more reps, doing more sets, and doing some different exercises just to keep some variety to it. And then those advanced techniques, I won't go through those again, but those are available to you to help you work either through your weak part or to help you work optimally through the full range of motion, both of which are generally important. So I hope you took something valuable from today's lesson. We'll see you here next time. So I do hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, would you do me a big favor and share this with your friends and family, at least those that you know would or should be interested in strength training. Maybe you can get them to be your strength training partner and you guys can go to the gym together. Anyway, I do appreciate if you'd share this with them. And next time on the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Miranda Esconde White and discuss her book, Forever Painless. Until then, have a happy and healthy day.